Like President Trump authorizing sanctions and raising steel tariffs on Turkey over its invasion into northern Syria. The White House administration said it would consider ramping up penalties unless Turkey is willing to embrace a ceasefire and end the violence. Let's go to Washington now. Yahoo Finance's Jessica Smith has the latest. Jess, are we hearing anything from the Turkish side, whether there's actually a chance of that happening?
Well, White House officials say that they did have that call with the president of Turkey yesterday, and they seemed to hint that they had a promising conversation. They said that Vice President Mike Pence wouldn't be going to Turkey if they didn't think it could help the situation. But the U.S. is imposing new sanctions on Turkey. It is hiking steel tariffs to 50%, and it's stopping trade negotiations with Turkey. The president went on to say he could destroy Turkey's economy if the country does not change its behavior. Critics on both sides of the aisle say President Trump essentially gave Turkey the green light to invade Syria by announcing his decision to move U.S. troops out of the region. As I mentioned, President Trump talked to the Turkish president yesterday, and Vice President Mike Pence recapped that call for reporters.
President Trump made it very clear that the United States is going to continue to take actions against Turkey's economy until they bring the violence to an end. We want an immediate ceasefire, and we want to begin negotiations between Turkey and Syrian defense forces.
Still, many critics say this is too little, too late. We saw a statement from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She said that President Trump has unleashed an escalation of chaos and insecurity in Syria. His announcement of a package of sanctions against Turkey falls very short of reversing that humanitarian disaster. We have heard from senior administration officials pushing back at the idea that the administration is just trying to clean up a mess it created. They argue that Turkey was going to invade regardless, and it did not make sense to have U.S. troops caught in the middle, but clearly many critics, including those in the president's own party, see it differently. Adam and Julie.
Jess, thank you. We're going to turn to the panel on this. Jim, I'm going to bring up something from our past a long time. Well, 12 years ago, I remember you had business dealings in Syria. A colleague of mine at a different network actually went to Syria to talk about the potential for growth. And now look at what's going on. Is there any way to get back to where we were in, say, 2007?
No, I think Syria is a dead duck. And if you'll remember, my grandparents came from there in the 1880s. So I have been following the Middle East with interest, casual interest, but with interest. No, the country has been dismembered forever, and this for the foreseeable future. And this latest move, I just don't get, because six years worth of work on ISIS, and all of a sudden they're being let out of the prisons. You're standing back so that Assad and Iran and Russia can fill the vacuum. I think that the United States air power could have prevented the Turks from going in, and there were ways to accomplish what the Turks are trying to accomplish without having the Turks invade. So this is a mess. I'm very surprised, and my personal opinion is the sanctions aren't enough to force him to retreat. He wants to move Syrian refugees in Turkey into the Kurdish areas of Syria, so that he has a non-Kurdish population on his southern border, not a Kurdish population, and it's a mess.
And it seems like this attempt at damage control is not really going to...
Impotence. Yeah. I mean, I just don't get what he was thinking, and just imagine what the Israelis are thinking. Think what the Saudi and the Gulf states are thinking, who think that we're their last resort. So I understand he wants to get out of wars, but there are intelligent ways to do it through negotiations, and I think the threat of American air power would have kept Turkey very honest.
Do you think that there's any chance of the sanctions actually playing a big role? You know, you said it's sort of like nothing on the surface, but we heard today that, you know, there are companies that are sort of refusing to build factories now in Turkey, and we're going to prohibit Turkey from accessing U.S. banks. You know, that could put a dent in the Turkish economy.
In the long term, in the intermediate and long term. But this military campaign could be over in 2 months before any of that has an effect. So the Middle East you and I have talked about it over the years. It's a very complicated, it's a mess, but it just got messier and more complicated.
And we're driving Turkey into whose arms? I mean,
Russia,
or maybe China. I mean, it's a NATO ally.
Yeah.
But if we're sanctioning a NATO ally and we have a major air base in Turkey.
Right.
I mean, there's a great deal more at play here.
And the Russians just sold them a sophisticated missile system. So we could have a long debate on the pros and cons of Trump's approach to foreign policy, but this one really, personally, as somebody who studied the Middle East over the years, baffles me.